Hello there, Crossroads family. Cheryl here to offer you some encouragement during our 14-day fast. During our fast, we are reflecting on the subject of faith. Specifically, we are looking in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11. This chapter gives us an example of people who have to walk by faith. It's also known as the hall of faith. Faith acts and moves like God is telling the truth, even when we don't see it. With confidence, we move as though it is already done. Where does our confidence come from? Our confidence comes from the object of our faith, which is God. For example, let's look at Hebrews chapter 11, where we read about Sarah, who heard a promise from God and waited for God to fulfill that promise. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 11, and this is what it says. By faith, even Sarah herself received the ability to conceive a child, even when she was long past the normal age for it, because she considered him who had given her the promise to be reliable and true to his word. Sarah was 65 and Abraham was 75 when God appeared to him and gave him a promise that Sarah would bear a son. And in fact, he promised Abraham that he would be the father of many descendants, and he said that Sarah would be the mother of kings and people. People would come from her. You can find that in Genesis chapter 17 and 15. However, 10 years after the promise of a son, Sarah was still childless. Can you imagine how she felt? She's now 75 years old, believing God even though she didn't see it, watching and experiencing her body get older. Can you imagine maybe there was some disappointment or some discouragement and maybe even some heartbreak thinking that God had forgotten about her? Sometimes that happens when we're waiting for God, doesn't it? At any rate, Sarah decided God is faithful. He keeps his word. So maybe he meant that I should have a son a different way. So what does she do? She goes to Abraham and tells him to lay with his maidservant Hagar. And as a result of Sarah's intervention, Ishmael is born. I think about it this way. Maybe she took her eye off of the promise maker and got so focused on the promise that she thought she needed to help God out. The Lord appeared to Abraham and assured him again of his promise. He said, "A year from now, you will have a son." And by this time, Abraham is 99. And he laughs when God tells him this. And God said, "Abraham, is there anything too hard for me? In fact, I'm going to drive this promise home, and I want you to name this boy child, this son, Isaac." 20 years after the original promise of a son, Sarah gave birth to her promise, and she named him Isaac. And guess what the name Isaac means? To laugh. Crossroads family, can you see why Sarah made it into the Hall of Faith? She was 65 years old when she was given this promise. It took faith for her to believe that. Here's the bottom line. The authority of Sarah's faith rested in the one who made the promise. She considered God to be reliable and true to his word. Are you waiting for your Isaac? What I mean is, has God promised you something and it hasn't come to pass yet? Have weeks and months and years passed and you're wondering, has God forgotten about you? Or maybe, like Sarah, you've tried to do an intervention only to result in more disappointment. Or it could be that you have taken your eyes off of the promise maker and so focused on what God has promised that you're missing what God is doing right now. Or maybe you feel numb because you're at this point where you're laughing with mockery and thinking God has completely forgotten about you. We combat our feelings with the word of God. Cry out to God. Feel your feelings. But don't get stuck there. Use your greatest weapon, which is worship. Worship has a way of changing our perspective. You can trust in, believe in, and rely on what God has said. Wait by faith. Don't let what you see make you forget what God has said.